All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to Tommy and Liz for being here with us tonight. I am Lelia from One More Page Books. I forgot to put one more page in my little name thing up here, but that's my situation. So if this is your first time watching one of our virtual events, or if you've not been to the store, One More Page Books is a small independent bookstore in Arlington, Virginia. So just outside DC, we sell wine and chocolate. We're currently closed to the public, unfortunately, but we're doing a lot of cool virtual events and selling all of our wares on the internet. So if you're so inclined, please do check out our store or email me and I'll tell you what specifically to check out in the store. And one of those things will definitely be Tommy's book because it's one of my favorites of the year. Here we go. Yeah. We have some signed book plates. So if you order from us, you'll get a signed book plate in your book. I'm trying to center it. This whole mirror thing really is tricky.
Oh, yes.
It's like, wait, where does it go? I'll put the link up here in a few minutes for people to you can just click on it. Don't do it now though, because obviously want to watch Tommy and Liz, or do it now and then again later. Maybe buy some for your friends. Would highly recommend it as a gift because when we receive this book at the bookstore, it's not often that we'll stop what we're doing. It's a little chaotic right now, so we're trying to be efficient. But one of us opened the book and started just like laughing out loud hysterically at some of Tommy's hilarious comics. I think we could all use a little more laughter this year. And like I said, I think it makes a great gift. We were delighted, and it was funny. My coworkers mentioned the book and said, yeah, Tommy Siegel, he's in a band called Jukebox the Ghost. I was like, I saw that band. Like, I didn't know Tommy Siegel was a cartoonist because I'm terrible at social media. I'm so sorry, Tommy. I should have known. And I was so excited to learn about you and your art and your challenge for yourself, which was to write to create 500 comics in 500 days, right? And yeah. To me, that was I was like, wow, you didn't even say a year. You were like, no, I'm going to do 500 days. That's harder. And unfortunately, you should have picked days that included a pandemic because I think it probably would have been easier to stay home and do, create some comics. But I think it's really great the way you talk about how being on the road sort of inspires a lot of your, the content. And it's, like I said, if you haven't read any of them or seen any of Tommy's comics, I would highly recommend looking them up. I'm just going to show a quick one right now that really I think is a good fall vibe here. Some pumpkins, but in any case, you can look at it at your leisure if you just buy a copy of the book, and you'll get a signed book plate. So, but yeah, as I mentioned, Tommy is a musician, singer, songwriter, cartoonist, many talents included here, and he's from Richmond, right? So
I'm from Richmond, Virginia.
Virginia, yeah. Joining us in conversation with him is Liz Warner. Thank you so much for joining us, Liz.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to cheat on your bio. Liz Warner is a New York City-based author and radio personality. Oh, that explains why you're so good at talking.
But not very good with the tech part.
Same, as you can see. You spent years in LA on air with alternative radio and on Indie 103, and then turned to New York City to anchor morning news for iHeartMedia. Sorry, I instinctively say iHeartRadio because I hear all the commercials for it.
It's all the same.
It's all one thing, right? Yeah. And you're also the author of 2 books, one collection of humorous essays for a Villard Random House, and one about the Arctic. So you can also look up Liz's books. You guys are going to have a great discussion. And please, if you're watching, do leave questions if you have them, and I will post them up, and we'll have a little question section towards the latter half here. Also, if you just want to comment about how great they are, that's also fine. Please do so. And like I said, I'll try to put the helpful links up in the comments. And I'm going to duck out here while you guys have a great conversation, and then I'll pop back in. So,
can I ask one question before you leave
Absolutely.
us? And I'm seeing it coming up in the chat, and I too wondered, can you define book plate?
Oh, I would love to define book plate. I've gotten really good at this over the last.
I don't use that term in daily parlance, and Tommy may, but I don't.
I should have brought one from the store.
It was new for me too. I'd never heard of a book plate until I was signing them.
It's a whole new world. And since it's signing in person is a little more challenging these days, we're really relying on signed book plates. So authors basically sign, it's a glorified sticker. And Tommy's is very good because Tommy's includes, he's as an artist is like got a slight doodle. So I'll do a little teaser for people that are going to get it. It has, it's you know, a fancy sticker that one would put in a book, like around where the author would sign it. And it has his signature on it. And like I said, a little doodle. But it's just a way to have a signed book without the book having been physically signed in person by the author, which is something that is a little harder these days. So yeah, it's
really just
nice.
adds more dimension.
Yes, exactly. Adds more dimension. And if somebody asks and you say like, oh yes, of course, this is my signed Tommy Siegel book. Yeah. And you know, then you can explain to them what a book plate is and they'll feel ridiculous, hopefully, because, you know, why would you know? Yeah, these are great questions. You guys are so active. I love this. Maybe a bookmark. We'll get you a bookmark too, but we don't have any Tommy Siegel bookmarks, unfortunately. So yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for that. I didn't expect the first question to be for me, but great. All right, I'm gonna attempt to leave here, but if I can't, I'll just awkwardly be up here for the remainder of this situation.
You don't have to. Whatever works.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
thank you again so much for being here with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay,
all right, well, here we go. Let's start talking about Tommy's book. Okay, for those of you who don't know, and I don't know how many, as I said, not the most technically proficient person on earth, but for those of you who don't know, Tommy is a rock star / author. And as Lilia was saying, he did the 500 comics in 500 days. Also, before we do anything, I know I've asked you this before, Tommy, are you a cartoonist or are you a comic artist? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I find the relationship between the words cartoon and comics to be very confusing. Because like, yeah, like you call it the comics page and there's comic strips, and yet a New Yorker, people call them New Yorker cartoons, but because it's a single panel, but people call The Far Side a comic. So I don't know.
Right. And Far Side, every bit as cerebral, if not better than things we see in the New York, but yeah. And so that's why I wondered, does one have more of a...
I've looked up the definition of both before, and it didn't clarify anything for me.
Okay, well, speaking of looking up, I was sent earlier, and I'm not going to by any means read everything your editor had to say, but he had to say something interesting, and it said, I also loved Tommy's style, almost like the New Yorker cartoons on psychedelics. And I thought that was a great phrase. I also wonder if it meant... the cartoons are on psychedelics, or if you were taking psychedelics while you were reading The New Yorker. I'm not sure which he means. And maybe you can start off and let us know, first up, as a creator, let's call you a creator, were you an artist? Were you an illustrator? Or were you a musician first? And how did you get started doing both?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I was obsessed with cartooning. That was all I did and all I cared about. And everyone around me who knew me, my friends, my family, everyone was like, this kid's going to be a cartoonist. And then when I hit puberty, I was like, I don't care about comics anymore. And I started a band and I really stopped doing, I associated it with my childhood. And so like, it's like that weird thing when you hit puberty and you want to shed the things that defined you as a kid. So I really just hit music full speed and didn't stop doing it full time until, like my mid 20s, I started kind of dabbling in cartoons. And if there are any, I know there's some jukebox fans that are in the comment section, but I started doodling on the road on tour for fans of the band as kind of like just a fun way to pass time in the van and a fun back and forth with people that wasn't just like, harassing them endlessly and haranguing them about when our next tour date was. So it's kind of like just an organic way to have something fun on social media on the road. And it just started growing from there. Like at first it was just, for a while it was fans of the band, and rightfully so. I don't think my cartoons were, or comics, whichever word you want to use. I don't think they were quite up to snuff yet, but they were kind of a fun detour if you liked the band already.
Sure.
And so it took me doing this daily personal challenge a couple of years ago for me to actually figure out what my voice was, because before that I'd just been doing requests, so I would like find a way to riff on other people's requests and sort of write jokes, but not really. So the 500 Days of Comics project was just an attempt to see, like, is there anything in my brain that will work in this format?
And
Like,
how much of the early stuff was, to your point, kind of crowdsourced, where you got inspiration or people said, hey, can you do this? And then suddenly one thing leads to another and you're suddenly creating these crazy, like, can you set up the actual challenge as it began?
yeah.
And were there a couple false starts and stuff?
Well, as it began, I mean, I had watched another cartoonist that I really love, Branson Reese. Shout out Branson Reese. Don't know him personally, but his comics are great. He had done a daily challenge for a year, and so I watched him do this, and I kind of came in midway through. I didn't really know him before that. So I was watching his work midway through, maybe 180 days in or something, and it just was like, this, what a crazy thing to do. But I was noticing they were getting better and better and funnier and funnier. And I kind of assumed they would get worse at some point because, you know, it just seems like a lot to put your brain and body through. So I just figured it would get worse, but they kept getting better and better. And I was like, I don't know, maybe this is a good idea. So yeah, I started the challenge and was kind of flailing wildly for the first few months, I think. Like, I was just kind of like stabbing in the dark. I did a lot of cartoons that involved like bullet point lists of things. And a lot that would have like 5 jokes in them, but only one of them was funny. And like, but I wasn't sure until I posted it. I was really like figuring it out. I was still drawing by hand and scanning it into a computer. And it just took a while for things to kind of like congeal. All of a sudden I started drawing floating eyes on everybody. And then that just kind of became the thing, you know?
And when did you, so let me skip ahead a little bit, because you're known for certain sort of groupings of comics. Certain things have taken off and had viral lives of their own, in addition to just the general viral sensation that your work has produced to begin with. But, you know, you and I break it down in terms of your genres. Do you know what I mean? When somebody says, what kind of comics does he do? Well, there's kind of a broad spectrum.
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I like to keep it wide open because I think with music, one part of music that I found very exhausting was that it can be about more than just the creative expression. There's like other things to consider, whether it's like what's going to go well live, or what's going to pop on radio, or what's going to get in a commercial and make us some money, that kind of stuff. With comics, because I was coming from this total noob perspective, there's no parameters. Like, it doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. And so I've tried to keep it that way. And I know that, like, you know, some people have really stuck to the candy hearts, for instance. And I think there are some people who follow my work specifically for the candy hearts, but I'm sort of deliberately depriving them of only posting candy hearts because I like the other stuff too much. So, and people have come from different avenues too. There's some people who, obviously, I mean, in the chat we're talking to, I know like Mitchell and Chardith, Erica, they're all fans of Jukebox the Ghost. So that's probably, you know, that's how they found out about my cartooning. For other people, the political comics definitely brought in a pretty big lefty audience. The nudes of the Pringle Man drew in a whole slew of corporate mascot perverts.
Sure. So really, there are factions within the Tommy Siegel cartoon empire. There
are factions, and they don't all agree. So, and I kind of noticed that. So, like, someone might follow me for Candy Hearts, and then I post kind of a lefty incendiary cartoon, and they're like, you know, I mean, what's funny is that they'll kind of reveal themselves as like not being longtime followers of the work, because I'll get a lot of comments that are like, "You've changed, man. I like your stuff before it was political," and I'm like, I was doing political stuff before I was doing the Candy Hearts. So.
Yeah. Now, when are you actually driven as an artist? When do people say, "Gee, we really do want to see more of the Pringles Man soon," and things like that? Like, how interactive is it? I don't mean in real time, but, you know, how much do fans say, "Hey, we haven't seen a butt in a long time"?
Yeah, I do get that kind of stuff. I mean, what's funny is when I started posting more Candy Hearts, I remember there were a handful of people who were like, "I don't like these. I want to see more. Keep doing your giant nose, floating eye thing.
Okay.
And by the way, there was someone in the comments who was kind of saying like, "Hey, I might be a Jukebox fan, but we're also fans of your comics." I didn't mean to
Got it.
downplay your interest in my comics. I do appreciate it. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, everyone wants more butts all the time. There's no ceiling in terms of how much butt content people
So
are
it's
willing
limitless
to.
butts, really.
Yeah, I mean, I figure at some point butts are going to go out of style, but it hasn't happened yet.
Now, so 500 was there one day where you just said, I can't today, I can't?
Yeah, there were a lot of days like that.
I mean, like Christmas, New Year's, were there hangovers? What?
Yeah, there were some. Yeah, as you would expect from 500 days, you're not feeling good for 500 days in a row. That's not how life works. But yeah, I tried to help myself out by always having a backlog of ideas and rough sketches of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I would tend to finish comics the day before posting, and then put finishing touches the morning I was putting it out. So that was kind of how I ran things, and I tried to make sure that, like, heading into a week, I'd be like, okay, Monday, I know I have some idea about, Candy Hearts at a baseball game or whatever. And the next day, on Tuesday, I think I want to do something about, this idea I had about Trump or whatever, So I'd kind of have vague ideas that would help me on those days when I really didn't want to do anything.
Well, let's talk about some of the viral sensations. Okay, I was floored when I heard about this John Oliver thing. The Pringles man, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Pringle man came to be actually through, when I was talking about these drawings by request on tour, it came through a van doodle, I called them, in the tour van. Somebody requested, can you draw what's really inside of a can of Pringles? And I drew the naked Pringle man crawling out of the can. And I guess I just noticed that people enjoyed it. I mean, people have been like, what's your obsession with the Pringle man? And I'm like, what's your obsession with the Pringle man? Because I'm responding to popular demand. People want to see the Pringle man.
They want it. Yep.
They want it.
Nothing on you. So, but what happened with the whole John? Like, tell us what happened.
Well, it's kind of still in progress, but I mean, a couple of weeks ago, on Last Week Tonight, John Oliver's show on HBO, they made kind of a passing joke about what does the Pringle man's body look like. And then they reached out to me last week about, using Pringle nudes for, I don't know if it's for they have like a web show or if it's for the actual show. I have no idea, but very excited to contribute my work, to
John Oliver's oeuvre.
I never know how to say that out loud.
I'm probably not the person to ask because I probably just butchered it myself. And also something I wanted to ask you about. Mark Hamill is a fan.
Well, I don't know if he's been regularly following, but he's certainly, every time I do a cartoon about him, he has some kind of response. So there's been a couple that he's. So
do you suppose a lot of people are controlling Mark Hamill's social media, or is it possible that in fact he is a fan?
I think he's genuinely a person who spends a lot of time on Twitter. Honestly, from following him, I think he just loves Twitter and checks his mentions. So I think it's them.
Yeah, I think it is too. So tell us how you got from 500 cartoons to selling a book to a publishing house. How'd that happen? And I'm assuming something might have had to do with social media. And in that case, can you sort of walk us through your process with social media?
Yeah. So, I mean, the comics project was, in function primarily a social media venture. That was my publishing platform for 500 days. I wasn't printing them anywhere. So they were all going up on Instagram, Tumblr, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter,
Now, did you change your sites and things like that and more on one? And so, like, how did that?
I tried to put every single one on every single one of those platforms every day. I gave up on Tumblr at some point just because there's just not enough people on there anymore. But I kept it regular everywhere else and had a whole methodology because you kind of have to format them differently on different social media platforms. It's a minor headache. But yeah, there was a point around the year mark where things started to really, really snowball. And it was hard to say if there was anything in particular that was causing it. It was just like, I think my comics were getting better from just doing them all the time. I'd originally planned to end it at 365 days, but I decided to extend it to 500 because it was kind of just snowballing. It made sense to keep going. And it was during that year mark so 365 to 500 that my audience like quintupled. So that was like that. The only problem with that was that at that point I felt I was kind of burnt out. I was getting better, but I was feeling burnt out, and I sort of felt like I'd made a joke about everything under the sun already. So that did feel like a big challenge, but I was amazed how it just like under that kind of pressure, it can be a bad thing when you have too much, but for me, it worked. It was like necessary pressure that, if I hadn't forced myself to do that 500 days, I don't think I would have made it. And I don't think I would have built that kind of audience. And then it was also like right at the end of the project too, that my editor, Lucas Wetzel, great dude, he DM'd me on Instagram and we started talking about putting out a comics compilation of some kind. So, yeah, it just all ended up working out at the exact right time where I physically couldn't do any more comics, but the right time for
and in addition to your output all being on social media, you were actually discovered and transacted that deal on social media.
Yes, that's true. Although we did move to phone. We weren't
email.
We weren't only slipping into each other's DMs.
So can you talk a little about, first of all, I got to ask, somewhere in here, you got to let us know. I know you're from Richmond. You're in a band. Just give us a tiny bit about you being a park ranger.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I mentioned that in passing when we were talking the other day. But
and you probably wish you didn't. But
no, I mean, that was, it's funny, like, that was the most fun job I've ever had. And I feel like
and that's saying something for a published author and a big recording artist. So,
and those things are really fun, but there's a lot of pressure on both of those things, like existentially and creatively. But yeah, I the park ranger gig was just pure fun for me. I, during college, applied for a job that I saw that actually didn't say that it was a national park ranger job in the ad that I saw on the street.
Was the word ranger mentioned at all?
No, it just said, seeking people for a historical job. And it wasn't until I contacted them, they were like, oh, by the way, this would be a federal park ranger. You would be a national park ranger. We have to get you through a Homeland Security clearance, like all that kind of stuff. So, I basically applied with them, and for 3 years during school and during the summers in college, and then after college as well, I was a park ranger, but I wasn't wearing the uniform very often. I mean, sometimes I would if there was like if they needed us for the 4th of July event on the mall or something, I'd be in the park ranger outfit. But most of the time I was in 1800s garb. And giving tours on an 1800s replica canal boat.
Wait, you have like a musket or something?
No muskets. Didn't want to scare people away, but I had a banjo. I played a lot of banjo for people. And yeah, we had mules pulling the boat. I mean, it was a mule powered boat. So I hung out with mules every day in my lunch break and got to know them really well.
Okay. So when you talk about routine and your lunch break, can you fast forward to your routine as a musician? And I was wondering, can you read a little bit of your book? Because I know that a lot of your audience is pretty familiar with the fact that you spend an awful lot of time in a tour van going all over the world.
Yes.
You want to read a little from your book for us?
Yeah, sure.
And just explain how, for those people who are here who might not know how much of it is comics, how much it is prose, what, just kind of break it down for us.
Yeah, so the book is mostly comics, but it's sort of a best of comics collection of the 500, some of them redrawn just because why waste paper with comics that aren't up to snuff. So I went back like George Lucas style and did like special editions of some comics.
Sure.
Then on top of that, I did some essays about kind of the experience and I don't know, just about the idea of me jumping fully nude into the world of cartooning and learning this new thing. So this is a short essay that's about creativity. So it's the chapter is called "How to Think of 500 Comics in 500 Days." I also get asked often, how do you think of so many ideas for comics? On a practical level, I always kept a notebook on me with a running list of ideas because I never knew when something was going to come to mind. But I should note that my ideas generally consisted of barely legible, vague prompts like a comic about no parking signs or a T-Rex with a big butt. My close friends also became a lifeline, particularly my best friend Dan, who was generous enough to pitch great ideas of his own, many of which are featured in this book, and donate a not insignificant percentage of his workday to answering my flurries of frantic text messages every morning. And by the way, as an aside, I should note he was in Alaska, so he was getting them. He lives in Alaska, so he was getting these text messages very, very early. I was sending him text messages at 8 a.m. Eastern, which would have been 5 a.m. Alaska time.
Gosh.
So he always took till 7 a.m. his time to get back to me, but he would wake up to a lot of text messages. Early on in the project, I also bought myself some time by doing a comic about every sign of the zodiac. And my backup plan in case of total inspiration disaster was to buy myself 50 days by doing a comic about every state in the United States. Thankfully, I was never forced to do this, but I should in this moment extend my sincerest apologies to Indiana for depriving them of their very first published comic. But as the project wore on, I found that the process for harvesting ideas for comics had a lot in common with my much longer experience with songwriting inspiration. If you do creative art of some kind, you know that inspiration is a slippery thing, appearing when you least expect it, and often disappearing when you need it the most. For me, the most effective method is this: don't think. It seems counterintuitive, but I found that the most direct way to conjure ideas was to deliberately do nothing at all. Nearly all of my best ideas came while on long walks or while running, while meditating, or rather while trying to meditate. As I understand it, all meditation is just a process of trying to meditate, generally unsuccessfully, and anyone who describes this incredibly difficult task as something they easily do is probably just trying to create a specific personality brand on social media as a coping mechanism for their perceived shortcomings. Namaste. Similarly, I thought of ideas while sitting on the toilet, while taking a shower. Ideas did not come to me when I allowed my digital addictions to take over. And if they did, they were mutated reflections of the cultural landscape that I didn't necessarily feel full creative ownership over. Usually, those ones were just half-baked regurgitations of popular memes that in hindsight look more like cries for attention than capital A art. I'm a big believer that anyone can channel creativity, but it requires a willingness to drop everything and allow space for new ideas to percolate. In my experience, new ideas only form when you've allowed room for new ones to grow and develop. It doesn't require some unattainable magic in your DNA. It's not a gift from God. It just requires putting out the welcome mat. My philosophy is this: if you're thinking about nothing, it provides room for something to enter. Paradoxically, as I was getting better at harnessing my creative energy for comics, the vast and empty headspace that nurtures new ideas started to feel threatened as the online following for my work began demanding more and more of my attention. And as I got more and more followers, every comic I published had hundreds of comments to sift through, emails to respond to, social media metrics to study and maximize, debates in the zeitgeist that begged a response, notifications I needed to check. How could I have the time to do nothing when there was so much something to do? My best idea during the project came right around the year mark. At that point, I was feeling a bit more confident in my drawing style, but still felt like something was missing. I had assumed at some point that I would stumble upon a regular cast of characters that I wanted to stick with and explore. But every time I tried to consciously conjure it up, I kept coming up dry. That is, until Valentine's Day. Likely while doing nothing, at least I think. It's hard to remember exactly when and where you were doing nothing. I thought of this quick gag involving conversation hearts. And then here's the Candy Hearts first comic, one with damaged, one with, but in the same way, and then one with damaged, but in a creepy way, leering in the background. And then the essay kind of segues into Candy Hearts content. So the end, sort of.
Nice segue. So, and that also is a book, we should say, there, I guess Lily already mentioned, it's also available, and we can click on the link and get that as well. And give somebody the first book for Christmas and give the second one for Valentine's Day.
There you go. I mean, and also just to reiterate, One More Page Books, great independent bookstore, and a great bookstore to support with your purchase. And I did these signed copies earlier in the fall, and they sold out. So these are the only other signed copies that are out there. So, and this was not some mass-produced book plate thing or whatever. I signed and did a little doodle on each one. So it's
those
real
book plates are going to be a thing of the past. I mean, those are those are heirlooms. Those are treasures. So one thing that I'm kind of fascinated by that I loved about your book is that you get very candid toward the end. Not going to spoil anything, but you do talk about, the beast that feeds you, that then you talk about the social media and the idea of algorithms. And without getting too technical, because I won't understand it, can you talk a little about your level of sort of awareness and then the kind of realizations that you might have had about your place in the world as a popular artist on social media?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to, like newspaper comics in the past they would draw a comic, they would put it in the newspaper, and that's kind of the end. I mean, they don't really know how people reacted to it. I mean, they might get fan mail, maybe. They might get letters to the editor, fed back through the syndicate if people hated the comic and they offended a bunch of people. They might know about that. But, in practice, a syndicated comic artist from before the internet was kind of like working in a vacuum. So it's an interesting comparison with if, I was doing a comic every day and getting real-time feedback. I would post it and literally see within 1 minute whether people liked it, that relative to my other work. And I even had a sense like if it gets this number of likes within a few minutes, that means it's like a popular comic. But that was kind of a weird thing to reckon with, because I don't like to think of art that way. I was talking about the idea of like wanting to separate commerce from art, but that was this weird way where I was forcing myself to interact with mediums that are essentially driven by ads. And that is the point of Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
Are you sure?
But we like to think of them as these sort of like, no, they're just places where we can say what we think.
Yeah, I just want to know what my friends ate for dinner.
Right. And they are that, but that is the second layer, right? The first layer is that they are selling ads, and they're selling ads on your lunch, So it was interesting to be have my work in this sort of primordial stage, right? I was like not an experienced comic artist at that point, being shaped by sort of I wouldn't say against my will, but sort of like on a subconscious level by what was responding well in an ad-driven format.
Yeah.
So there's weird things about that. I started to notice that what things did well, and they tended to be things that were shocking, like let's say the Pringle Man, or they tended to be incendiary because engagement, that's the sort of Silicon Valley buzzword for people getting agitated either in a happy way or in a sad way or in an angry way. Like engagement is just agitation, essentially. So if I was posting a political cartoon the ones that would do well were not the ones that were kind of nuanced, you know, calls for unity, you know, or something. They tended to be the ones that were like, this is the most shocking way I could portray that sentiment and get your attention.
You're saying nuance doesn't work in a divisive, polarized world?
Yeah, I mean, it is wild to think about how social media has had that effect on our society at large, where nuance and even just general friendliness is not incentivized. It is you're incentivized to go
it is
war.
Discouraged.
Yes, and you're incentivized to go to war, and you sort of see that to the extreme. Like this year, you see with like all the QAnon stuff, like leading up to the election. It's like it's not enough to be like if you're a Trump person, you're like, it's not enough to be like, I like his policies. It has to be the Democrats are pedophiles. Like that. That has to be the base for your support. You have to love and hate in equal measure. And so that's something I really struggled with, because I felt like I was putting my honest opinions on the internet, but I was also stirring up the bee's nest in a way that I wasn't sure, and it depended on the comic, whether it was turning into a constructive conversation or whether it was creating lines in the sand. And even tougher to make that call. I mean, the way I sort of absolve my own guilt from it is that knowing that we are currently in a society where we live in a society, you know, that's the internet phrase, where the president is doing that. So it's hard to disarm, you know, to do like a both sides disarming and just deciding to tone the timbre down when the president of the United States is the one who rode those algorithms to the top and is benefiting from exacerbating hatred, essentially.
Do you find that because now you're a political cartoonist among your other genres, do you find that in addition to the rest of the hellscape that we live in 2020, it encouraged you to do more political stuff, or it discouraged you? Do you see what I'm saying? Like with this hotbed, how did you?
I mean, I think for me, I've always been very political. So it just is always, if I have a political thought, I've never been shy about, you know, even before I was cartooning, about putting it out there, whether it was tweeting or, you know, I've always done work for political campaigns, and I've always been pretty aggressively political, and tried to really think about the world that I want to live in, and not be afraid of sort of saying it out loud. But yeah, I mean, it certainly comes to bite me in the ass sometimes. And there's some times where I'll do a really good political cartoon, or one I think is good, and sit with it right before I'm posting and go like, oh no, I don't want to deal with what comes next. Like when I actually put it out there.
Do you, do you have in the book that you could show us? And like, what have you done that you thought was just kind of fun and game and kind of a good thing to put out there, and you were horrified at the response because it was either A or B?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of them, but I mean,
well, I'm sure of that, but maybe one that you could show us instantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I think I know where this one is.
Because I guess my larger question is, when do you feel that you're starting to know your audience, and do you start to know your audience and all of a sudden they make a left turn and it turns out that you suddenly question whether you knew them in the first, you know what I mean?
Right. So this cartoon was just, does it spark joy, and it has, Marie Kondo throwing the U.S. Electoral College out the window, which to me, you know, I mean, my political awakening was 2000 with the Bush v.
It may also have been your birth year, given what little I know about you, but keep going.
Well, I was a very precocious, I guess, high schooler. So like early high school, like, so I was like very, I had this perception of like, this election was stolen. And I was very, very upset about it. So to me, the idea of getting rid of the Electoral College is like, obviously we should get rid of the Electoral College. Like, that's been true since it was created. We should definitely get rid of that. It doesn't make any sense. And also the rationales that people tend to throw out there, like, oh, it's for rural interests. It's not, nor does it advantage rural interests. It just advantages a small number of swing states. So anyways, I don't think of that as being a super incendiary thing. But it has become one, because now it has become the only way that Republicans can win presidential elections is by using the Electoral College to their advantage, which means that they have now put a very specific ideological ownership of the idea. And then in reverse been like, well, it's to protect farmers and it's to protect rural interests and the tyranny of cities, none of which is true about the Electoral College. But it means that people have now staked out these grounds. So I posted that cartoon. In my mind, not a super crazy thing.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You're playing off two different ideas, the political and the marine. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And then what happened?
And then, I mean, the craziest thing that happened was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retweeted it.
Oh, I know her. Yeah.
That is when things got really crazy. And I got to interact with her followers, some of which are,
probably here tonight.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of normal, nice people. But then I also got a lot of, death threats and, people calling me a communist Jew, that they're going to kill me. And, just totally wild stuff. To the point where I couldn't really use Twitter for like a week. So yeah, it's a weird thing, because I don't regret putting the cartoon out there. I think it was part of a conversation, but when you start, or I wasn't starting that conversation, that's obviously been a long running one, but when you inject yourself into a conversation in a significant way, you're going to get a lot of blowback. And it definitely sucks to be like on the end of the blowback, because it's not particularly pleasant. And the only way I figured out how to deal with it is to just not look at social media when I sense it going in that direction. And if I do, to just use it as an opportunity to just to mute people or block people who are being threatening, So
what you're saying is it sucks to have relevance and strike a nerve. Kinda.
Well, there's a downside to being part of a political conversation about things you care about, which is that there are other people who care about things that are different.
Okay. I got excited and added myself back in because I wanted to just say I would love to watch like a show where you just explain, like you talk about the Electoral College. I think that would be an amazing, like, just to win your free time.
I don't know if I do a very good job, but I appreciate it.
I do. I think you did an amazing job.
That was that the comic that you this one stuck with me so much that you talked about in the book that you had went viral, and then you put on a mug and was like, oh yeah, by the way, here's some merch. And this was like how you can tell that the algorithm was completely like and we as a bookstore we struggle with this too. Is it's like you can't just post something to your Facebook and assume that everyone that follows you will see it. And you sold like 17 mugs or something like that with 1 million views. Was that the Electoral College comic?
No, that was it was a very benign comic I did about.
Was that another viral sensation of yours, Tommy?
It was a comic about coffee addiction. So it was like the stages of coffee addiction. But yeah, it was that one. It was only on Facebook that it went crazy, but it went really crazy on Facebook. So that was interesting.
Should have sold more mugs. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Then next time.
And will there be mugs in the future? I guess the question that I had.
I've done I guess that's probably the only mug I've done, but I expect I'll do. I do some merch, and I certainly have some on my web store, but I'm always very cautious with it because I have this deep fear, and maybe this is like and this is maybe a little DC of me, but like I feel like I have this like Fugazi baggage where I'm like psychologically where merch feels dirty to me, and so I want to make sure it's really good. Oh,
so you're referencing the band Fugazi.
Yeah, because they didn't sell any merchandise. They viewed it as being like ideologically.
I know, and there was the problem with the Nike ad, and remember that?
I actually don't.
Nike actually at one juncture, I think it was. Well, I'm sure all your like rocker friends are. I'm going to get this wrong, but there was some ad where they tried to utilize. Was it Ian MacKay or McKay?
Yeah.
And he was so anti the logo that I'll get the story, but at another time. But back to you. I bet we've got some questions.
Oh yeah.
I want to say this is.
I have 5,000 questions, but I can't be the only one because that's not fair.
This is the most comments I think we've ever gotten on anything probably we've ever done as a store, honestly. So I just want to say thank you to you guys and to all of your fans who are here, who are have just wonderful things to say. I love it. One of the comments was just how engaging the conversation is. So thank you for that. Thank you, Tina, who I think had to go. Thank you. Let's see, one comment from Mike Rohde, who actually is a cartoonist as well. Thank you for tuning in, Mike, who was not as familiar with your work. He asked how you were distributing your comics, which I think you guys touched on, which was predominantly on your social media. But you also have a Patreon, I believe. I will.
And also, I do feel like I should shout out a lot of the people who have been commenting and chatting regularly. I know from real life, but also from Patreon. There's just like an amazing crew of people. So now,
do you do a regular live stream thing where you're actually illustrating, creating them? What is that? When does that happen?
Yeah, I do. I've been very bad at it for the last month and a half because I've been really deep into making a new record with Jukebox the Ghost, and we've been going 12 to 14 hours a day, and I haven't really had time to stream. But yeah, normally I try and stream regularly. If I'm working on a new comic, I'll pop on and stream and have like a multicam operation where it's me talking and I can play music from my computer and maybe play a song every once in a while, and also have a split screen where they can see what I'm drawing as it's happening in real time.
And that typically happens with some frequency, and they can just go to your website or your Insta whatever and find it.
Yeah, sometimes I'll do it on Instagram Live, but more regularly on Patreon. Yeah, it's fun.
Speaking of which, I know you were talking about other cartoonists. Could you tell us who are some artists you admire? And while we're at it, because we're in the kind of multidisciplinary genre, who are some bands you're into? Just tell us more about you, the creator, and who you admire.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I feel like when you're in music full time, you're constantly like you're like a hermit crab, where like you'll get a musical shell that you live in for a while, and then you get rid of it and you find another shell,
get rid of it. Great metaphor. I've never heard that.
So I feel like I'm on my 50th shell at this point. But I grew up being a big classic rock guy. I was also I lived and breathed the Beatles, and also went to I was like super into Fish and the Grateful Dead and that whole world. And then it was like as indie music was really blowing up in the early 2000s, I was totally on that wave too. Definitely have had a lot of different phases in there, and been a fan of country and jazz and hip hop and all sorts of stuff. The last few years I've been really into African music, just because I find it really refreshing and different. And I do a lot of devil's advocate listens where I force myself, if I catch myself smack talking a musical artist, I then force myself to listen to their entire discography and then see if I still agree with myself. And I've found that every time I'm wrong, regardless of what every single artist I've been like, oh, I don't like them. If I actually take the time to digest them as they've put themselves into the world intentionally, then I usually come away being like, oh no, I actually love U2, who I didn't think I liked, that kind of stuff.
Let's put some meat on those bones. Who did you just think was going to be? You thought they were ghastly, and then you listened to their canon, and you said to yourself,
"Well, it's more that I didn't think they were for me." So I always thought Billy Joel was not for me, and then I went deep, and I was like, "No, Billy Joel's great." And then I always thought Steely Dan wasn't for me, and I was like, "No, I love Steely Dan." So any of those things would seem obvious to someone who already likes those artists, but it's amazing how, I mean, in a way the way that we can politically pigeonhole ourselves into a certain ideology, you can musically pigeonhole yourself into an identity that has nothing to do with the quality of the music.
And how about cartoonists? And while we're at it, would you grow up? Where did you look at Peanuts? Did you look at the Far Side?
Yeah, I was a comic strip dork growing up, so I loved. I mean, Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side were my big two, but Bloom County, Doonesbury. I liked a lot of old comics like Pogo and like Little Abner and Little Nemo and Slumberland and like kind of those Crazy Cat, those like classics from like the 30s and 40s. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes were definitely the big two for me. These days, there's so many amazing webcomic artists. And I try and shout them out every once in a while for people who aren't on my social media, for people who aren't like deep in that world. But there's like 20 or 30 just like amazing webcomic artists who are constantly putting out stuff that puts the stuff in the newspaper to shame, honestly. So it's a very vibrant, rich world of comics. I feel like I've talked to some people who associate the heyday of comics with Calvin Hobbes and The Far Side and the kind of peak of the genre in the 90s. But I mean, there's just amazing webcomics out there. The form is still just brimming with talent.
Did you have? Yeah, I didn't mean to. Oh,
no, I was just going to say that was an amazing answer, and I wanted to say I loved the image in the back of the book that you had. I assume of your wall as a kid, which I assume it sounds like you drew or painted all the different cartoon creatures on there of different, different artists, and for movies as well. It's impressive, and also it shows such a wide range of from Wallace and Gromit to Calvin and Hobbes, and it's.
Yeah, it's like my parents were just very nice and let me draw in Sharpie on the wall.
It's just Sharpie. I was like, surely it's some kind of
which is
paint.
funny. I mean, there's certain things. There's ways in which I've gotten better at drawing, I think, as an adult from really diving into it heavily. But then I look at that and I'm like, I don't think I could do that now, like freehanding on a wall. And I don't know how I did that because I've lost whatever that is. Like when you're a kid and you can just sort of instinctually copy something.
I can draw this tiger. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of crazy.
What do you use now, literally, when you're climbing into your van and you're saying to yourself you're going to do something? What do you do? What do you use?
I use, and I can show you, but it's on my iPad. I got one of those screens that sort of has the texture of paper, so it has a little bit of texture to it. So it's not like just sliding around on glass, but I use Procreate. I used to use Photoshop, but Procreate is a lot more intuitive, and I don't really need the features of Photoshop. But yeah, basically it's just a iPad screen. You choose from a million different pens, and you're off to the races. And look at this masterpiece.
Wow. And on the live stream, on the Patreon live stream, people can watch you do all of it in real time in life.
Yeah, I had to learn a very complicated setup, which the Patreon people were very patient in following me through the stages of learning it. But yeah, I figured out a method where you can connect an iPad, run it through your computer, run it as a split screen along with your webcam, have animations going, show people videos, and all that kind of stuff. But it took a lot of trial and error, and I'm sure I've blown some speakers out in people's homes by accident before. So. Yeah.
Okay? So this book you should get right now. Then get the Candy Hearts book to give to Valentine's people, particularly like disengaged, disaffected, angry, discouraged Valentine's people. So it actually probably makes for a nice general gift to a lot of people that can be loving, but it doesn't have to be loving. So that actually broadens your gift base. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you can just give it to like people that are funny and think you're funny. So that's another idea. But so first book, second book, then what's next? Are you on tour? Have you got to finish a record in 15 minutes or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, the record has definitely taken up all of my brain space since the book came out, essentially. And we are not done. So we're going to be working on that into the new year as well. So I guess it's been very strange. I feel like I've had a very comics dominated year because I can't tour. But yeah, it's been interesting baby stepping back into music. So I put out a solo record for the first time this summer. And then the band got back together and it's been really weird to switch lanes in my brain. I'm definitely finding that I'm not thinking of comic ideas right now. I'm thinking of music ideas.
But
And
how is there a parallel when you say you put out a solo record? Presumably you wrote your own songs. Where's the part of the brain that writes its own song for a solo performance versus the part of the brain that comes up with the conceit behind a cartoon?
yeah, to me,
That creation.
they're both come from that kind of blank space I was babbling about earlier for my book. Just that vast open headspace where if you let yourself have nothing going on, an idea comes in, but you kind of have to know, you have to want to manifest something, right? Like creativity works in limitations, knowing what genre you're working in, or if you're just told to think of a drawing, it's kind of difficult. But if I'm told to think of a comic, then I start going, okay, well, what's funny? Like, what's happening this week? Or, I'm on a walk and I see a bird and I'm like, oh, what if I, drew a pigeon doing this? Or, but yeah, the process is like at that beginning stage is very similar because it's just about opening space in your brain for a new idea. But music sort of comes from that ethereal, non-objective driven space for me, like where it's more about like, I don't want to be too corny, but it's almost like it's like something that comes from the heart. Like you don't really know what it's saying in a concrete way, the same way that you do with a comic. Like a comic, you have a comic when you think of a joke, which elicits a very specific response of laughter. But a song, you're not, the only response you're going for is like, do you want to listen to it?
Now, with that in mind, when you're writing a song versus a comic, do you do the music and the words first, or the art, the illustration, or the verbiage of a cartoon?
I tend to go like idea first. So like with a song, I tend to go like if I've thought of a hook, or if a melody came to mind, or something that you can really like anchor the rest of it with. Because at this point, it's like I kind of know how to like build a song around an idea, as long as there's one idea. And then with comics, I feel like I don't start drawing until I have an idea of what I'm going to draw. But that might be partially my own training from doing this constant 500 days of comics thing, because I didn't really curate that open space of making something without an objective in mind. So I'm kind of looking forward to when this record's done and the books are out there in the world, treating comics in the way that I've been able to treat music, which is to say like as just a playground and with no objective in mind. Because I don't know what that would be with comics, and that would be pretty fun.
Well, it's kind of fun for us already.
It's pretty fun to read the book, Tommy, I gotta say. And it's pretty fun to listen to the music.
I don't mean to, so it's fun to make as well. I guess I'm more
it'll be great when you get a break, because right now it's pretty wonderful for the rest of us.
Well, I guess I'm more mean the process, because the process for me is very much objective driven. It's like I have the idea, and then the process is about finishing the idea. And I've never like I feel like I don't, in the way that I'll sit with a guitar and just sort of noodle around for hours and not really know what I'm not writing a song. I'm just noodling. I don't really do that with cartoons, and I think that would be interesting.
Don't you do you never doodle while you're noodling?
I'll do. Oh, by the way, you've stumbled upon something, a terminology that I'm sure the people in the chat will appreciate, which is with the band. There's the other singer in the band plays keyboards, and so he does this thing where he calls noodling at noon. So he goes on social media platforms at noon a few times a week and will just improvise piano for a half hour.
Oh, wow.
And so, and because I'm always doing these doodling live streams, there's become this whole thing where there's noodlers and doodlers, and a lot of them are the same people, but there's like this whole.
Oh, wow.
It's very cool.
Wow.
Doodles and noodles.
So it's like
I love following that in the comments. It was just like a whole mythology that I didn't know about.
It's like a Team Edward, Team Jacob thing.
Yeah, but it seems like everyone's on both teams, so it's like not
much less conflict. That's great.
Weird. Yeah, no. and it's not sexual, so that's good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of butts though.
I do draw a lot of butts. It's sexual from my end.
That's true. Yeah, this is the most that butts has ever been mentioned in a one more page comment portal or in person. So you get a medal for that. We'll be sending it in the mail shortly.
I love that.
I just want to say that reading your book really also, it made me feel more creative. And I think I even sketched a doodle or noodle to doodle. Everyone correct me on the verbiage.
I love it.
For like a cartoon, for a one more page related cartoon. So I just want to say thank you for unlocking that, the creativity that had been stifled for quite some time. You know, I don't know why I wouldn't have been creative with all I do, you know, is work and then go scroll on social media. So what was I doing wrong? I don't know. But I'm so grateful to you guys both for being here. You were fantastic. Everyone in the comments said so. And thank you everyone in the comments for being, you should come to all of our events. I'm so excited to get to have seen this amazing community that you all have. And I'm so excited for Candy Hearts coming out. I can't wait to buy this for everyone I know. I put the links up again, so if you don't see them, just scroll back up through all the amazing comments. Thank you, Erica, who commented something great earlier that I meant to shout out, and everyone, just all being great. So yeah, thank you again. Liz, you were amazing. I love your nail polish also. And Tommy, thank you for creating such wonderful art, both
Tommy's a genius.
Are you an actual genius? Would love to see the paperwork on that.
I'm also a moron, so I don't know.
But you knew what a book plate was.
I did want to interject again and let people know, again, great independent bookstore. You can buy signed copy. They're signed if you order them from One More Page. And also, I mean, it's kind of been under the radar, but you can pre-order Candy Hearts specifically through them. So why
not? Why not jump on that now and so you'll be ready when it's time to give your cerebral friends something at Valentine's Day, even if they didn't think that you'd think of them. And it turns out you did, and you won with a good book.
Lily, thanks so much for having me, and Liz, thanks for all the.
Oh, thank you guys.
It was amazing, and I would love, again, we'd love to have you all back in the store for an in-store event. Someday when we get to do fun things again.
I would love that.
It'll happen.
It'll happen. Thank you guys so much, and thank you to everyone in the comments. I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening. I'm going to try to end this, but we'll see because I'm not very good with technology. So that's all.
Awesome.